Disney trips to wrestling and all that's in between. On the MIC, it's the KEY to recall what we see. Like a magic trick can take you back, so open sesame. Come with us, we'll take a ride through epic memories. That nostalgia that hits your heart and gets you every time. That do you remember? Makes you laugh and sometimes makes you cry. It's the bops, the shows, the shops. Frank and Jen don't stop. Welcome everybody to Dillos Pop.
It's a Thursday here on the Dillos Diz YouTube channel with this second edition of Dillos Pop. She is Jen.
Hello.
And I am Frank, and for the next, 30 to 45 minutes, we're gonna bring you some not exactly a Disney talk like we're prone to do on Theme Park Thursday. It is Theme Park Thursday. It is a Thursday. We did drop a new episode in our audio feed today.
Yes.
We are here to talk a little bit about pop culture, but we're going to intertwine some of the common themes, the things that we like, the things that we talk about over the past 5 years on the podcast. So we've been introducing this new element to the Dillos Diz umbrella, as it were, with Dillos Pop. I should note that in the intro there is like
Uh-oh. Frank is glitching already.
I don't understand when I hit live.
You're fine as we talk backstage, all leading up to it. And then as soon as you go live, you start the glitching and the freezing. I don't know what happens.
It's really crazy about how that happens.
Yeah.
I don't understand, like, why. Like, now you're freezing. I don't know what's happening. Am I freezing or you're freezing?
I mean, isn't it always you? So we'll just blame you. So.
I mean, it's got to blame me because I don't understand. I checked all the things. It might just be time for a new computer, Frank. Just drop the money already.
Exactly. Been telling you for 5 years.
One of the things that as I was about I was about to say in intro is there's like a little unintentional inside joke within the words of Matt Harvey's bop there that I don't want to mention here publicly, but I'll mention it in our one channel Discord at dillosdizresort.com.
Interesting.
Immediately following this live stream.
All right. Well, fair enough. So those Discorders get the inside scoop.
Yeah, it's a very not as smoky day here in New York with the smoke blowing in from the Canada.
The Canada. I know. I kind of felt like, should we have a smoky effect as we go live? Just like we come out of the smoke. Yeah.
A haze across the screen.
Yes.
So yeah, we're. I was like, "Oh, I'm out walking around in a mask." This morning. Yes, interesting. It's an interesting choice.
It's an interesting choice. But we're back, and we're back, and you're glitchy, and he's getting angry with the glitchiness. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Tom, Michelle. I love that you're working and lurking. You're just in time to see Frank getting mad over his internet connection. So that's good. And hello to everyone in the chat, by the way. I don't think we said good morning. So good morning to all of you. Thank you for joining us today for Dillos Pop.
And I don't know, is it a StreamYard thing? Because I have
Lewis says you have to check the performance of your computer. Are you X'd out of everything else in the background? Did you X it all
I've updated everything. I've done all the... I'm gonna close like windows all over the place because...
There you go. Do that. Lexi says you have your angry eyes on. So
yeah. Listen, the frustration with my computer is real. Are you hearing me better immediately after I'm talking, or?
Yes, I think so. Unless you're on a big delay and I don't even realize.
Yeah. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I'm gonna keep closing windows. Like I don't
Seems
I'm
like
I don't even know what. All right,
anyway, see what happens.
how are we doing now?
All right. Think we're all right.
We're doing better. We're doing better.
Yeah.
I can't wait to drop this into the audio feed with just 5
Yeah.
minutes of glitching.
Well, maybe I'll do a quick edit for it.
So, hi everybody, welcome. This second episode of Dillos Pop is focusing on Ted Lasso, which did it or did it not end last week when everyone thought it was dropping at 9 p.m. on the East Coast on the Tuesday night. The whole other scenario there.
Why would they do that? People had parties scheduled. What are you doing?
Yeah, it was on. Everyone thought, oh, on May 30th, it's gonna happen, and then, well, just kidding, midnight East Coast, May 31st, after weeks of dropping it 3 hours earlier. So, in the classic 3-act structure, we get 3 seasons of Ted Lasso. And we're here to talk about it and how it affects us and how it impacts us and how it fits into what we love about all the things in our lives that you've heard us talk about the last 5 years on the podcast and whatnot.
Yes. And my first question, though, to you, we both watched This Is Us, and we have both watched Ted Lasso. Which show did you cry more at? You. Personally,
I would oh gosh, I like cry. I don't know. I would say I was tearier for Ted Lasso than I was for This Is Us.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what I mean,
that checks out. That checks out for you.
My life is more like Ted Lasso over the years than it is for This Is Us. I would say, we started This Is Us during right at the beginning of the pandemic. We had just wrapped up like season 3 of Mrs. Maisel, which will probably be our next Dillos Pop episode. We just wrapped that up and once the pandemic started, we went into This Is Us, and there was just like suppression of everything. Like, there was just emotional suppression for a very long time.
Just push those emotions down.
So yeah, I would say though with This Is Us, I had knots in my stomach more about what was going to happen to the characters. So when I think much like Randall, the worst case scenario, often my worst case scenario didn't come to fruition. So I always felt relief more than like emotional release. Like, okay, nothing bad happened. And that was like every episode. Where Ted Lasso, I feel like you get those unexpected moments of connection or support and care for one another that I relate to more. I know everyone here thinks, based on the last 5 years, that I am closed off, unemotional, unaffected, presumably angry. That is not true.
The Dillos were so emotional, we're unemotional. But I do think, just even based on what you just said, it does speak to the fact that you felt more of a connection with Ted Lasso than you did This Is Us. So This Is Us, although an emotional show and you were kind of pushing those emotions away, you were not in the moment with This Is Us because you were like, oh, well, what if this happens to this character? And what if this happened? And so it wasn't happening. And with Ted Lasso, you're probably more connected and you're in it and you're in the moment and you're going through the journey with them and you're connected to the characters more as it's happening than the like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this?
Right. And over the years, and that's just, I think I think that's a great point, is that Ted Lasso was a show that was crafted to keep you in the present, which is the improviser's way, right? It is, and we'll get into the whole history and everything else, where This Is Us, I think, with the time hops, much like the last season of Mrs. Maisel, creates a little bit more of a disconnect
Yeah.
So because you're looking back, oh, how it happened here. So yeah, it was often how the past on This Is Us connected to the present.
Yeah.
That maybe you would get that little emotional payoff there of
Mm-hmm.
things that happened in the past, and then you see the results in the present. Where Ted Lasso, you're in it, you're with it, you're staying present,
Yeah.
and so you're living it in the moment, which is the improv way.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Jen, I know you probably have a list of things, so I'm going to pass it to you first because there's several elements, and I'm sure I can riff on any of them. So I'm going to go to you first and say, what about the show, do you most take away?
So, much like we're already starting to compare other shows, I think there has to be an episode of Dillos Pop where we do kind of break down some shows, because we had for those of you that listen to Theme Park Thursday and know us from Theme Park Thursday, you know that we've been hanging out in hospitals recently. And so we had a conversation one day about TV writing now versus like the 90s or whatever it is. So I feel like that conversation is for another day. But for Ted Lasso specifically, I feel like, and even based on my own assumption, like when I saw the picture of Jason Sudeikis with a mustache, Ted Lasso, it's a sports thing. Immediately I went, it's going to be like just a silly comedy, like just a whatever show, and a lot of I was like, I don't know if I'll be into this just based on the photo and my assumption of it. And what you come to realize about this show, it is different than so many others. The writing is different. What you would expect from certain characters, you are not getting the typical backgrounds of them, the whatever it is. But it is a show that comes from like the point of view of kindness, the point of view of second chances, the point of view of giving the benefit of the doubt, letting people find their own way and going on their journey, and not, holding grudges necessarily, but also what happens to the characters within themselves as all of these things are happening. So I just think it took a different approach to writing and storytelling that you haven't seen much of before.
Yeah, and I think that comes from, I want to say, because it's what I see most often, right? It comes from that improv place. And if you read like interviews or stories or whatever, or Wikipedia, wherever you want to go, part of the creation of the series, leaving behind the fact that Sudeikis created the character in 2013, part of that creation of the series came from this, the pre-pandemic bubbling of negativity that was coming to the surface, and social media, social media's been going on forever, but it really rose a little bit more in those a couple of years before the pandemic hit. And, if I think Sudeikis himself would say, well, that 2013 version, maybe a little more to what you're talking about, Jen, with the character being a little, of the comedies, immediately you go, oh, there's gonna be a Saturday Night Live comedy, and maybe then sometimes there's that disconnect. But I feel like Sudeikis saw what was going on in the world and saw an opportunity to say, hey, we're gonna come to it from a different angle, and really used a lot of fundamentals of improv in his improv training, in the 90s. And then he brought in Brendan Hunt, who played Coach Beard, who has a lot of improv training as one of the writers. You got Brett Goldstein, who played Roy Kent, who has a lot of show creation, different angles on creating live performance. Those minds together then was able to almost apply those things to how they wrote the show. And it's very unique because you talk about the last 20 years of TV, which has become very, and not that ensembles didn't exist, but we talk about ensembles way more than we, whether it started with Sopranos or we talk about Lost, which the whole Vanity Fair article is out. That's a whole other thing. But there were shows that just had very rich characters that afforded those shows, Mad Men, the opportunity to go, even if the shows aren't as strong in writing or plot or story, the characters are so rich and so good. And again, how those characters evolved, kind of they all the characters yes-anded what they were doing over this time, that it allowed, when you read about the naysayers of season 3, you go, well, you're looking at it from a non-character point of view. Like, take the ride with the characters and what the characters are experiencing. I think you get a different appreciation for the show that you might get if you're story or plot driven.
Yeah. And I think that speaking to the improv piece too, if you've read or watched TikToks like we have all about Ted Lasso, especially in the last couple of weeks, where people are pointing out, all the Easter eggs, the pyramid of success that hangs in Ted's office. If you go deeper with that, Jason Sudeikis has said he used that when he would teach improv, and he, and it also is the bigger umbrella of the show of there are so many subtleties across the show, whether it is looks on faces of people, whether it's books that they're reading, whether it's an inside joke, a rom-com connection, which I loved, whatever it is, there's so many of these. It's not just words on a page. It's even when Ted would do the press conferences, and he would go back and forth with the press where he's like doing song lyrics to see if who can bounce back with him or whatever it was, or tell a joke and see who could get it back. It goes so much deeper than just the words on a page. There's so much thought behind it all that I think makes it mean so much more and connects you so much more, and makes you appreciate the comedy behind it all too, because it's not just a joke to be a joke. It's so thought out.
Yeah. And Jen, you just nod if you can hear me talking in real time is really the question here.
I think.
Yes, she can. She can hear me talking in real time. This is excellent. As I didn't catch all of what you're saying as I was live and glitchy at the same time. No, and I think that's, it's really, I'm reading Lewis's comment of he liked it but didn't love it. Something, again, it's that, it ran, and I think it's a risk-taking line thing, right? It's the you're riding a fine line of things that go on in real life, in the soccer leagues versus this kind of comedic element, and the what do I say? The suspension of disbelief, which is something I brought on a lot. Like, I'm not that into football or soccer here. Obviously there was a big story here with, I don't gonna say his name wrong, with Messi going to Miami, and like the behind the scenes of that, where it's really all the owners pulling money together so that he can go somewhere else, because when he visits those other stadiums, those stadiums are going to sell out. So it's a business thing where all the owners benefit. And I'm like, I don't know if I would have been into the story. If this is, but it's a fascinating story of the business and the popularity of the sport.
Yes.
And often we say here that like, oh, it'd be cool to go to years ago when we were probably visiting London or something. Oh, it'd be cool to go to a football match someday. But all at the same time, like, oh, it's got to be crazy though.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been to a couple of college football games, but not rivalry intense, but you see that kind of atmosphere. And I think that was another element of it is for the creators is that, there is such a shared experience in that sport.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it very easy for improvisers to create a world of play that allows them to play into that support and that positivity, even when they were calling them am I allowed to say wanker on here? Over it, like that
Yes.
that there was still even in the use of that word, almost like, but if you start winning, I got your back, kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you want to go like character by character of their journeys, or little sum ups? How do you want to play it all out? I will say too, and maybe if you're already listening to this, or you're waiting to listen to this, whatever, there will probably be spoilers. So if anyone is watching this, if anyone is listening to this, although we have been talking kind of more as an overall, there will probably be spoilers coming up if we start going down the character paths. So just putting that warning out. So come back and listen after.
Lexi's going la 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 la.
Yeah, exactly.
And Lexi and Lewis both are talking about overhyped things in the chat, and I don't like the overhyped either. Like Mrs. Dillo and I often argue about the Broadway musical, The Producers, where Jen and I and Mama Dillo saw the producers, or I got tickets before it became a thing.
Yeah.
And we're there in the very early portion of the run with Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick, where Mrs. Dillo is like, well, it was too hyped. I wasn't good. It was not going to live up to my expectations. So I was like, you didn't. But to us, it's like the greatest thing you've ever seen in your life, because it was just so of the moment. But agreed with the overhype, with the Ted Lasso stuff. We collectively, the audience, worked ourselves up a little bit into the hype. What's going to happen? What are the things? How do you solve these problems? What's going to happen next week? Where I feel like everyone involved with the show was like, it's 3 seasons. We're wrapping up the story. It's a 3-act structure. It's, like, don't get too excited. Like, they were, if you read previous, everyone was kind of like, it's just a thing. It's just a story. You don't get crazy.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery to be solved. And I think they tried to prep us to not get hype, but I marveled at the dichotomy of people who are upset with season 3 versus those who love season 3. And again, I so it takes it to the characters, and I don't know who you want to start with, or where you want to start with. I think one of the biggest things that you could argue about season 3, and Lexi, I'll try to phrase it correctly, is how much Ted seemed removed from. Like slowly more periphery, slowly more behind the scenes, where if I had to say one thing about his character arc, his journey over these 3 years, I'll have to do a rewatch, but I didn't feel resolved maybe until the penultimate episode, the second to last episode of of his what was affecting him during season 2, and the anxiety, and that I wanted more. And it was a show in the end where they didn't need to show you everything. They didn't need to show you on screen every single thing, even though we wanted it. That was one thing where, and maybe just the actions he took was all you needed to see to know that was resolved. But I felt, and maybe again, it's my own personal anxiety, that was like, I want to see a strong resolution. That was one of my things. So it was not bothersome, but it was difficult to see him, see the character take a back seat and be on the periphery as often as he was.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely like a phasing out, but to the point of the Lasso way. And needing the title of the book changed, that's a spoiler, that it was never about him. And I think that says so much about the show overall, is that he was part of the group, and he came in with a different approach to managing and coaching, and he was more about the people, and more about the growth of character, and more about seeing things beyond a game on a field, and while also dealing with his own stuff like that. It was a way of dealing, I think, with his own anxieties and his own background, was to, pay it forward almost. And he was so focused on that it is, it was interesting then, as time went on, to see him be pulled more and more away. And at the same time, I mean, I love him and I want to see more of him. You don't miss him in this show. You know, like sometimes if you're going to take the character to which the show is named and remove him, you would think you would feel it more, and you didn't feel it as much because all of the characters were so good and had such great stories that it wasn't like, oh, where's Ted? Why isn't Ted in this? They need Ted in this episode. You didn't necessarily need him. I see that Val said someone compared the number of words he spoke in the scene with Rebecca in the stadium seats. She spoke over 130. He said 3.
Yeah.
And that's it too, you know, and there's, again, it's kind of like Beard. To me, Beard's eyes throughout every episode say so much, good, bad, whatever it is, that he doesn't have to talk much. And you know everything happening just by the look on his face or the eyes he's making or whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's hard because they did spend a lot of, or what felt like a lot of time at one point, on the fact that he had anxiety and how it affected him. But I guess also seeing, you know, he went through therapy, he saw the changes in his team and their personalities and their growth, and kind of started to feel like, I think my job here is done. And I think that was, and overall, he also kind of got closure, I think, with his mom and said what he needed to say and got that out, that all of these little things doesn't mean like, oh, he's fine now and now he's off and no big deal, but it's showing how he's dealing with things while still on his journey.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're talking and as you're mentioning things, and then I'm thinking of other scenes. I'm like, well, you could consider that, the how the sign plays into it in the final episode. Like, is that like, no, that's all you needed? And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point of the scene with him and Rebecca, which is very, it was very intentional. It's a very intentional scene of him saying so little. But I think that. And again, I'm going to say things, and it's just that I wanted more of an emotional moment for him in that departure. Love the musical number in the final scene. Love the halftime scene with the sign, as mentioned. I think those scenes are there. They don't hit you over the head, which is what the show never hit you over the head to me.
Yes.
So I think it's more of I don't want to say like I feel deprived of a moment, and I don't know where that's lacking. And maybe if I reference one thing later, maybe it's because it's gonna be something I didn't want. We'll just get into it right now. Where rom-coms were so prevalent in this show, and the references all the way up to the You've Got Mail stuff, where it convinced a slew of people who are so used to will they or won't they on Cheers, on Moonlighting. That's what we grew up on. And to not not to I think because you didn't. And I'm not saying with a romantic coupling at the end or anything like that. I feel like you didn't get the rom-com ending per se, unless you want to say the rom-com is Ted and his son.
Well, and a lot of people have connected a rom-com to Rory and football.
Right. Yeah.
That being his, and his in his story and all, so that there are these different connecting points. But yes, and also as you bring up, so I think for probably the first 2 seasons, I wasn't looking or seeing much on Ted Lasso on social media. I just, so I was just living in it, and I was living in that world and appreciating it, being in the moment, all those things. As season 3 is happening, and it seems like more people are into it and more people are talking about it. So now you're seeing people point out things like, will Ted and Rebecca end up together? And it is something I never, ever thought about, of like, no, I don't want this. I don't want this. This is because, to me, they made it where, like, sure, in the beginning she hired him like as a who's this guy, but how their relationship developed in such a friendship, work colleague way, where they were there to support each other, they were there to check on each other, they were there in these other ways that showed a relationship that doesn't have to be romantic to be a strong connection. And I liked that, because to me it would have been easy to just have them together. That would have been the easy thing of like, what happens with it? And I'm sure they were kind of toying with the audience along the way of like putting out these little like, oh, what do you think? I never wanted it, but also because I was seeing so much about it along the way on social media, I do feel like it took me out of some of the final episodes a little bit, because I was like, oh, guys, this is going to happen. I don't want this to happen. Is this it? Is this the scene? No? Okay. But is this the scene? Oh, great. This is going to be the moment. No? Okay. And now I want to go back knowing what I know and going, okay, let me just appreciate these scenes now. And it's not going to be this big moment where I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. And going back to Ted and the big moments or big wrap-ups or whatever, I know that the show overall got recognized for talking about mental health. And to me, it was almost funny to me that they were making such a big deal out of the show talking about it, because it didn't feel like they were beating you over the head with it. It felt subtle, and it almost normalized it all. I mean, it didn't almost, it did. It normalized it all. So I also feel that with Ted of, yes, he has anxiety. Yes, he had some tough teenage years. Yes, he has this relationship with his son that he wants to make stronger, but he's kind of afraid to. And he's going through all of these things. And that is a part of life. You don't just wrap up anxiety. You just don't, it doesn't stop. It is with you, and how you live with it and grow with it, and it goes on in your life. I kind of feel like that's what they were doing with Ted as well, of normalizing, like, there is no end to this little bit. This is just a part of him now, and there he goes. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think it's a good point, and it's funny to I see Val mentioned that the Cheers connection. So I mean, with George Wendt being Jason Sudeikis's uncle, but also what always stood out to me was the idea of the second half of Cheers. You got the Diane years, and then you got the Rebecca years. And the Rebecca years, people were still waiting for, well, eventually they're going to recreate Ted and Diane, funny enough. Ted Danson's character, Sam Malone, and Diane, as I finally catch myself, Sam and Diane, with the character of Ted Danson played Sam Malone with Rebecca.
Right.
But now I had Ted in my brain because I was trying to make the Ted and Rebecca correlation there.
Yes.
And once they put their foot in the water a little bit with that, you could see like why it couldn't go that way in Cheers. And I think there probably was a lesson learned by Jason Sudeikis when it comes to Cheers and the will they or won't they with that. I think to get into, and Beard is the one who had the rom-com ending, right? He's the one who got off the plane and ran off. So there are those elements too that it's like, well, you did get a rom-com ending. It just wasn't with the character you thought should have the rom-com ending,
right?
Yes, unless you want to interpret it differently. With the supporting cast, which I don't know where you want to go. You want to go Kire, or you want to go Roy, or you want to go Jamie, or you want to go Nate. Where do you want to go next?
I feel like Nate is bigger probably than everybody else. Can we briefly maybe touch on Rupert for a second, and then maybe go down the Roy Keeley
Kire.
because Rupert, obviously, I loved how they just, obviously who was the villain from the start, but how they just like developed him into this comic book character of a villain with how his office and the things he wore. And to me, I think some people wanted to see like Rebecca really take him down. And I am a big believer in life that when you have these people in your world, whether you work with people like this or you just know them or whatever in your life, I'm a big believer of you don't need to call it out. You don't need to do something to make sure everybody knows that they're not the best person. They will bury themselves in some way. And I felt like Rupert buried himself. Were there little touches of things Rebecca did along the way? Sure. But ultimately, all of his actions caught up with him and he buried himself. And also, there was a moment, because this is what Ted Lasso does to you too, that as he's exiting the stadium at the very end and he does his look back, there is a moment where I felt a little pity. And I felt a little bit bad for Rupert because of Rebecca's speech a couple of episodes before. And what she said to him before the game of who's luckier than you, whoever wins today, it's a team you love. And you see that this kid who loved this game, who grew up, and he just got overwhelmed by power, and that took over him, and look at where he ended up. And you're in the stadium where you grew up, and you're being hated by everyone. And it's like there's like this little bit of like, oh, it didn't have to go this way. It didn't have to. But also I appreciated that he did it to himself, and all of his actions caught up with him. And that's kind of, you don't necessarily want to be the person to put that person into the ground. You want to let them like, oh, let's just let this play out and see what happens. And I kind of appreciated that. But I know other people were like, but what happened? What happened with the assistant? What happened with Nate? And there are these kind of untold little tidbits that, something went down and you don't really know the full story. But it's like, but do we need the full story? Because ultimately, that's it.
Yeah, shout out to Anthony and Surfbum in the chat here.
Ew.
What's going on? Good morning. We're talking about Ted Lasso because we love characters. We've been talking about characters for years with all the Dillos, Diz live streams and podcasts. So here we are now with Dillos Pop. I didn't have the logo ready. And Ted Lasso. You create happy situations for yourself when you're a show this good. And I think where everyone was like, okay, Nate in season 2 is rising to become this antagonist for season 3, and it's the sports cliche, and Ted must defeat Nate in the final episode, and then rejoicing will take place. Like, that is what everyone envisioned when season 2 ended.
Yeah.
And, if you want to take it further, since Dr. Val mentioned the Star Wars character that Rupert was, the Imperial March basically playing across, he's walking across the field, onto the field before the whole testicle incident. And, where you could have seen also, Nate have his Darth Vader moment, turning on the Emperor and holding him over his head and throwing him down. You still got that, but very, very subtly, because it was Nate's play in that final episode. And rather than seeing the big moment again, I think people would have then argued whether it was the right choice to have Nate triumph over Rupert. Rather than, would that have overshadowed Rebecca's awesome speech 2 episodes before,
right?
And her getting that closure with Rupert. I think when you have both of those great relationships forming on the same show, you could have tried to do both, but people would have then argued that one should have happened over the other, or one shouldn't have happened because the other one was more important. All of that. I think that's why you saw things play out the way they did, and maybe not, but that was my instinct. It was like, well, if you really did a lot with Nate, because I was disappointed that I didn't see it culminate, but then I thought about it and I was like, but then you don't get this Rebecca moment. that's not as, that doesn't play as strong maybe. And I think it definitely needed that. And even in that interaction in the final episode that you mentioned.
Yeah. Maybe we go to Nate since we are mentioning him so much. And it's funny because Val and I have talked away from the lives and all of this about Nate. And she was saying she had a journey with Nate. And her and I kind of had different journeys with Nate. So I'm interested to hear what you thought of the whole trajectory of Nate.
And in season 2, you see the seeds being planted. I still felt it happened too quickly, but when you're in a 3-act story, you kind of had to have it culminate the way it did in season 2. So I know people's issues with season 3, whether you didn't need the Zava stuff or anything like that, and where you could have dedicated more time to, you think you have a new antagonist in Nate, but really instead the idea of people who grow and discover things about themselves are going to make mistakes. It's how you deal with the mistakes and the choice, the next step. Are you going, I'm going to stay on this path and become Rupert? Or am I going to realize, like, this is not the person I am, and now I'm too far away from the person I am? How do I get back to that? So I think that is always an interesting thing in entertainment, and maybe more so the last 20 years or so, because I've had people say, and I probably have said it like on a Fedora Club or a movie club or something like that, where I've said, I know people who won't go to Marvel movies because they became too, you saw too many of their human flaws. So like people didn't like Iron Man because he was so flawed. And they like, no, I just want to be a superhero. And, and I was like, Michael Keaton's Batman was flawed. So I'm like, what are you talking about? You saw like, it's always there, but they want Christopher Reeve Superman. And I'm like, sure, that's fine. But I think then you get the people who are like, it's not really, I want to see dichotomy. I want to see, I want to see an expanded character. I want to see more of what happens when they're not just being a superhero. And I think that's what the Marvel movies have provided. So here with Nate, I think people were disappointed that they didn't see him get comeuppance per se. And but I think, and maybe we'll talk about this here in the last 15 minutes, I think they had to leave some room. And I would have liked to have seen more of Nate, I guess. And I feel like you saw enough, but at the same time, I wanted to see more. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's to your point, they were telling a story in these 3 parts. It was hard to spend, because these characters have such a big background to them and big storylines to each of them. It was hard to really go deep or too nitpicky with specific scenes and every single moment that was happening to them. I think with Nate, personally, I think I saw Nate the same way Ted was seeing Nate. And there are 2 ways to see Nate: through Beard's eyes or through Ted's eyes, really, I think is how you were watching all of this. And for me, when Nate started to turn a little bit, it was like, what are you doing? What's happening? Why is this happening? And then you see Nate and interacting with his dad and wanting that approval from him and wanting to be this person to his dad, that I felt like, oh, okay, so this is your issue, which again, and people have said that the whole show is daddy issues, right? I mean, everyone has issues with father figures on the show. And so seeing that, where everything he was doing was really to go against or prove himself on both sides to his dad ultimately. And Ted was giving him the support and the love that he wanted from his dad and he needed, but that also made it go, no, I don't want this from you. I want it from him. And now I'm going down this other path, which will make me look important. And that's what my dad wants to see. I'm important, see, and I'm powerful. And this is until he realized, oh, wait, maybe this isn't worth it. And so did Nate do things he shouldn't have done? Yes. Did he make mistakes? Was he not so kind, as I talk about the show coming from a place of kindness, but also coming from a place of second chances? Did he do things that he shouldn't have done? He made mistakes. He hurt people along the way, but also, like you're saying, people are going to make mistakes as they are growing and as they are finding their way. And that is what they were showing with Nate. He made mistakes. He did things he shouldn't have. He also showed regret. You also see this moment with his dad in the 3rd season where his dad is like, what are you talking about? Like, here's how I feel about you. And the coming together of that family, where I also think a lot of people felt like, what is this relationship with Jade, right? Jade is his girlfriend's name. Like, what is this relationship? I'm not feeling it. I'm like, it has nothing to do with their relationship. It's not about them. This is not a love story for Nate. This is someone else is playing a part in Nate's story, and someone else is in his journey, and how he's getting to this place he's in. She's a part of that now. It's not really it's not a rom-com with Nate and this girl. It was very cute, and you see the little aspects of old Nate where he's making the box just like he did in the early seasons, where he's making those little boxes and it was trying to ask her out on a date that way, and all these little things to get him back to who he was. The conversation with his mom and his sister is kind of bringing him back to ground him a little bit. And so I felt like, as I was watching Nate, although I didn't love every step he took and everything he did, I kept watching him through Ted's eyes. And Ted was like, you gotta let him do it. You gotta let him learn. You gotta let him go on his own journey. I can't change him. I can't control him. I did what I felt I could do, because I think it's also easy to come from a place of looking at him through Beard's eyes, where you just want to get mad at him. How dare you? How dare you do this to Ted? Do you see everything Ted just did for you? But that's kind of the easy way to look at things, as opposed to looking at it with empathy and sympathy, and that Nate is someone who needed to go on this journey, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's deep, and I think then when what's fascinating about the show as a whole is, here we could talk about things where, like, I wanted to see more, but then what they did show you, we can peel back so many layers on it. Roy and Keeley and Jamie, who did you want to see Keeley end up with at the end of the series, and why? The choices that were made. How did you feel? Were you team Jamie or were you team Roy?
No, I was team Roy. First of all, Jamie, probably the biggest character development on the show, of where he was and where he came to, and his own journey with all his daddy issues as well. But I appreciate that he had so much growth, but I felt like, no, him and Keeley are done. Like, that's not a thing. Roy, I felt like that they had a good relationship. They were supportive of each other, but when they were together, they were at these points in their lives where he's having a life change in a career of coming up as coaching, managing, and not really playing as much. She's having this change of becoming a boss and doing all of that, you could say, like, oh, maybe the timing was just off or whatever it was. But I do feel like they were supportive of each other and they did love each other. So I was hoping that would continue. Now, this is one of the storylines, the three of them, that is left wide open for more story to tell if they were to continue the show in some capacity. But I will say, when the two of them showed up to her house going, you get to pick who you want to be with, as if it was a favor to her. Like, here, we're going to give you this gift. We've decided we're not going to fight about it anymore. You can pick one of us. You don't go to Keely with that. She is not a person that's going to go, oh, well, hold on, let me think about that. No, that's not who Keely is. You just pushed her away. So I felt like it was kind of a weird wrap up that they chose that route of, right now she's not ending up with either of them because they're both being ridiculous. And I do feel like it was a step back of like, why are you all being ridiculous about this? This is a little silly. But also, oh, well, this is now one of those cliffhangers that they could continue if they wanted to tell more stories about the team as a whole.
Yeah, I think, with Keely, a lot of the season 3 criticism, has been that I've read has been geared towards her, and that the character kind of stepped back a little bit in terms of the overall things going on the show. And I'm not here to disagree. It was almost like in that final montage at the end when Keely goes to Rebecca's office with the binder, and I'm like, oh gosh, I wish we would have had that as the starting point of season 3. Like, if she dropped that binder on her desk at the beginning of season 3, and that was her journey and the struggles and things like I would have been way more interested in that story arc for her than the one that we got. And I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened. And again, it's one of those things where it's a show where you got to see characters move forward and then step back, and that's life, right? I'm taking this big step forward to myself. Oh, and I maybe didn't do the best thing for myself. And it has nothing to do with the relationship or who she was choosing or anything like that. It has to do with I wanted Keely to do what was best for her, and sometimes you weren't seeing that in a professional standpoint, not a romantic standpoint aside, but you don't that's not what's the word phrase I'm looking for. It's not you don't poop where you work, kind of thing. That's not the phrase, but something like that. And so it had nothing to do with who she was picking as her partners. It was the situations professionally she was in. So I hated to see that big step back for her, but again, moving forward, you're gonna do something that maybe not the best professional choice for yourself. And so that, again, you saw it with Roy, you saw it with Nate, you saw it with Keely. They're all doing things that as they're trying to grow as people, that is a normal aspect of life. And I agree. I just hated Jamie in that first season. Like, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is a likable character, like the other ones are likable characters. And, then he wins you over. I think Lewis said here in the chat that maybe to a fault, it was too much there at the end. And, sometimes people go overboard. I think that's the case too. Jen, do you think there'll be spinoffs?
I mean, I know they've said they're taking a break for now. I think I almost don't know if it's a spinoff specifically, or you just kind of continue the show. I guess it can't be called Ted Lasso, but maybe it's called The Richmond Way or whatever it is. But that you continue the show and keep doing these story arcs for characters, and you keep telling these different things. You have now the opening of a women's league, so you can follow that whole thing. You have which also involves Keely, now this love triangle thing, and does that turn into anything? I'm a little confused. First of all, Sam, and also I would like to just say the rest of the team, every character and every team member, awesome and amazing. And I love Sam, and I loved his story, and I think I just enjoy watching him on screen. So I would also love to see him more. So I do think there are plenty of stories still to tell, and there's more depth you can do with some of the supporting characters. And so I would like to see it. But I guess I don't know. I feel like so many people want it that I am hoping, but I want it done in like the right way. And I
Right.
think the writers behind this and everybody behind Ted Lasso, if they're going to do it, I do feel like they would do it in the right way. They're not going to do it just because, oh, the fans want some more, so
Well,
here's
they're
another season of something.
backing up the armored cash truck,
Right.
truck of cash.
Yeah.
That's going to be a factor as well. And you
Yes.
hope again they do it for the right reasons rather than the big amount of cash. Because as everyone's pointing out, Ted Lasso is the landmark show of Apple Plus.
Yeah.
There's not much there. I don't know if you had it, Jen, before the final episode. Did they run through like every show that they have? Like, here's all our TV shows.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
And you go, okay.
Yeah.
And there's not anything that was grabbing me, right? So yes, they have this kind of landmark show that they have to kind of build around.
Mhm.
Streaming is such a funny thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's still an evolving medium to me.
Yeah. Mhm.
Where The Rise of Skywalker, which came out in 2019,
Mhm.
the end of that movie just screams like every character can have a spin-off. Every character can have what we used to call TV specials, like on
Yep.
the Sunday night movie, and
Mhm.
it would be a Matlock movie or something, a Columbo movie, and
Yeah.
where you can take a character and give them 90 minutes to
Yep.
create, and that's where when I look at Ted Lasso, I go, you could do a series. You
Mhm.
could do a sports movie. You
Yeah.
could do a rom-com. You could
Mhm.
do there's so many Mrs. Dillo thinks I'm crazy that I want to see a Trent Krim show. I do.
Oh, God.
I
Yeah.
look at that Eugene Levy. I want to watch that show where
Yes.
he goes to different places and it's uncomfortable for him.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see that with Trent Krim in a fictional environment.
He's so good.
Mhm.
He's so good, Trent Krim. Like, I want more of him. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that with streaming, people still trying to figure out what is best for their business model.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's a right answer.
Yeah.
But they have opportunities. They have so much. They have so much they can and
Yeah.
that it is it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Mhm. And Val was saying, I wonder if they will finish Shrinking first and then revisit.
Mm.
And I mean, right now, I think with the writer's strike, like what's going to happen anyway? So who knows how much time everything will take, regardless. But on Apple TV, I personally watched Shrinking. I thought that was really good. I think there's more to do there,
Yeah.
but not in the same way as Ted Lasso. I love Shrinking, but not in the same way as I love Ted Lasso. The morning show. And I also watched Trying, but that was it for me. But I know there's so many shows on there, and there are some that I watch and I go, I don't know. I just feel like I couldn't get into that one. I don't
Yeah.
know, but they keep going with seasons, so maybe.
We tried Schmigadoon, which
yeah.
we're musical people.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Dillo was like, I didn't hear good things. I was like, there was like a week where I heard good things. Like everyone was talking about it suddenly, and it put on the first episode. I love Cicely Strong. I couldn't make it through the first episode. I was like, get me out of here. I'm going to put on the new John Mulvaney comedy special on Netflix. So, yeah, I have a feeling, because we're going to do Mrs. Maisel Pop coming up.
Yeah.
I think when we get to the end of the month, we've done it, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Hello, New York accent. Fedora Club before. But with the new movie coming out, I sense in my head an Indiana Jones conversation that would turn into a Shrinking conversation. So that might be a Dillos Pop spinoff as well.
No, we have a lot of ideas for Pop episodes. It's just finding the time.
Yeah. Lewis, I agree. Trent Krim should have, I mean, as a journalist, but I kind of want to see it in that way of he is thrust into environments he's not familiar with to write his next book and whatever the craziness happens around him. Yeah. Like Trent Krim in the world of Shrinking to do a book about the Harrison Ford character.
Yeah.
Like I think I would want to see him show up and write a book about their practice.
Yes.
Why not?
Right. Yeah, that would be funny.
Tom is in the thread here saying love Shrinking. I don't know. I mean, I might have to watch it on my own because I felt the daggers being stared at me the whole time. But it was not something that grabbed me right away, and I was disappointed.
Yeah.
all the Indiana Jones movies on Disney Plus right now. The 7-year-old is she, at first when she saw the trailer for the new Indiana Jones movie, she was kind of like, too realistic. I don't like the. And now as she sees the images on Disney Plus, she's kind of like, well, which one should I watch first? And I'm like, oh, I got to ease you in. I don't think you'll be into the faces melting.
Yeah.
Yep. But all right, well, that'll wrap up this edition, the second edition of Dillos Pop. We'll drop Jen will probably edit out the first 5 minutes or so, and then we'll get this into the audio feed. You can share it with your friends. But thanks for taking the time. I don't think we're done talking about Ted Lasso. I think when we end up doing Mrs. Maisel, we're gonna then make all the connections to Ted Lasso. I really thought talking about Ted Lasso, I would be talking about Mad Men a lot, but I think that's also gonna happen with Mrs. Maisel. So this is I think the journey that we're on for a little while, talking about ensemble-based things, and strong characters. But thanks for taking the time to chat with us here this morning on the Dillos Diz YouTube channel. If you want to give the thumbs like the thumbs, the thumbs, the put up, the thumbs up, the thumbs up thing,
like the subscribes, the shares, do it all.
Do it all. And then we'll see you again along the way. Until next time, she's Jen and I'm Frank. Bye-bye.
Deuces.